Dear friends, welcome to our channel Refuge of Sinners for another episode of Science, Politics and Faith. Tonight's guest is Brook Jackson.
Welcome to our channel, Refuge of Sinners. Today we have Brook Jackson and Warner Mendenhall. Brook Jackson is a clinical research auditor and a certified clinical research professional. She has worked in the clinical trials field for 20 years. Before working for Ventavia, Jackson served as the director of operations for a multi-state clinical trial company. She was working for Ventavia from September 8, 2020 as a regional director. Warner Mendenhall is a lawyer from Ohio, and Warner is part of the team currently representing Brook Jackson. Hello, both of you. Hello.
Hello.
So, Brook, I might start actually with asking you to explain, I've just told everybody that you worked for Ventavia for a short while. Can you tell everyone what Ventavia is?
So Ventavia Research Group is a contractor that was used in Pfizer's phase 3 clinical trial on their COVID-19 vaccine. So Pfizer delegated some of their responsibilities to outside contractors. So that was Ventavia's role. They were a clinical trial site. In total, there were 3 who were tasked with enrolling patients into the trial.
Right, and that's in Texas.
It is in Texas, yes.
And that's where you're from.
I am.
So, Brook, can you tell us what your job role as regional director at Ventavia entailed? What were your responsibilities?
So mainly my responsibilities were to manage the day-to-day operations of the trial. We had clinical trial staff, researchers, that were overseeing the patients, study doctors or principal investigators that were monitoring for adverse events, and really just caring for that patient through their journey in the clinical trial from day one through the end of their participation. So really just to manage those day-to-day ops, a lot of HR type things with the research staff. Auditing of the clinical trial data was one of my responsibilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, how did you feel about getting this contract? Was it important to you that this vaccine was tested properly?
Certainly. I've been in clinical research for nearly 20 years, and I've seen devices, therapeutics, treatments that have gone from the clinical trial phase into what we use in medicine as standard of care. So I've watched those things go through the pipeline and have been a part of some really exciting things that are helping people and patients every day. And so, yes, I was certainly excited to, be a part of this vaccine trial. I was, before coming to Ventavia, a director of operations for a very similar company. We worked very early on in the point of care testing or the rapid testing of the devices used to detect COVID-19. So in leaving that position and going to Ventavia and knowing that they were working in this vaccine space and for COVID-19, I was certainly excited and happy to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you. That gives us some background. So now when you went to Ventavia on that September 8, 2020, they were doing the phase 3 trial for Pfizer. They had 3 sites bringing in trial participants. Now, a lot of people don't understand some of the terminology that's used and what phase 3 means. And like some of the terminology that I find people don't understand is they don't know what blinding is. They don't realize the trial is got a placebo arm and a live arm. So could you explain just those basic concepts to people before we go further?
Sure. So the phase 3 part of this study in the vaccine was where the Pfizer was looking to enroll the biggest group of patients to test the vaccine's safety and its efficacy. Does it work and is it safe? So in total, they were looking to enroll about 44,000 patients into the trial worldwide. So this was not just in the United States, this was outside of the United States as well. The blinding part of a study is considered the gold standard in research. And what that does is when a study is blinded, it really prevents a bias from being injected into the clinical trial by keeping the drug assignment a secret from, in this particular study, everyone except the person that was given the vaccine to the participants. So the study doctor was blinded. So that means that they did not know whether the patient was receiving a placebo, which is just normal saline, or if they were receiving the active product or active vaccine. And again, that just prevents a bias from being injected into the study, and is the gold standard in clinical research.
Yeah. So just to clarify that, the trial participant doesn't know whether they're getting a placebo or the live vaccine, right? And the doctor who talks to that trial participant, and when the trial participant maybe calls in later and says, hey, I've got a sore throat, hey, my arm hurts, all the people taking those calls, they don't know whether that, they're not meant to know if it's blinded. They're not meant to know if that person ringing got the live vaccine or the placebo, right? And that's important so that the person taking the call, A, doesn't tell the trial participant the truth, right? So the trial participant's starting to get nervous. They can't tell the trial participant whether they took, I'm going to call them the trialists, sorry. They can't tell them whether they took the vaccine or not because they don't know. They can't make that mistake. And then they themselves can't show any bias when they're recording, because like if you knew the person only took the saline, you'd be thinking, well, it's nothing. Or I can imagine that the person taking the records might show some bias, might twist a symptom one way or another if they thought the person had or hadn't taken the vaccine. So that's what you mean by bias.
Absolutely. And I like to, and you explained that perfectly, better than I did. And I guess one little story that I like to talk about when I'm discussing the randomization and the blinding in a trial is, imagine if the study doctor that is over the study, the one that's monitoring your health, receives your chart because you've called into the clinic and you're sick, you're ill, you maybe have a fever, or like you said, a sore throat, a cough. And that study doctor opens your history and right away sees that you have been given the vaccine. And that was done inadvertently. So he inadvertently sees that, you're on the actual vaccine arm, and he's been hearing from the sponsors and from news media and, all these places that this vaccine is working perfectly. It's showing to be safe. It's showing to be effective. That may change the course of his treatment. So that's really what we're trying to do, what we're trying to prevent in the blinding of a study, is that type of bias from being, injected. And sometimes, like you mentioned, the placebo effect, if the patient knows that, they've got this or that, it may change the way that they answer questions. And so that's the real reason why we try to avoid, a patient knowing if they're in a double blinded study. So the only people in this particular trial design that knew what patients were receiving was the unblinded vaccinator. Everybody else in the clinical trial that was working on it was blinded.
Right. So I think people understand the blinding concept now. So let's go to what you saw. So you start September 8. What did you see though? Let's cut straight to the blinding subject now that we just covered it. You hinted what you saw. What did you see?
Immediately when I walked into Ventavia, when I'm giving talks and interviews, I always think about, the first 5 things that I saw. One of those was, informed consent. We'll get there. But one of the top findings that I had as an auditor was the fact that Ventavia had unblinded every patient that was randomized in the trial from the moment they started enrolling, which was in July of 2020, through our finding, which was in around September 14th of 2020. So every patient that received the vaccine in this trial had their randomization assignments scheme and printed in their chart.
Right. So if it's printed in the chart, then everyone who opens that chart sees it.
Exactly.
Right. So that's the doctor that might take the call. What about did you have admin staff initially who took the calls maybe from the trialists? Yeah.
Certainly. Yes, certainly. So anybody that was involved in the study, the staff, the research staff, the research physicians, the director level staff like myself, if I went to pull a chart and opened it, I would automatically know that this patient, was receiving the placebo or receiving the vaccine. And per Pfizer's own protocol, that should immediately warranted a call to Pfizer directly to let them know that there was a potential unblinding in the study.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you the obvious question. July 2020 to September 14, you start September 8. Did anyone make that call from Ventavia, or anyone bring this up as an issue in July, August, or early September?
So they didn't realize what was happening until August of 2020, when we were auditing these charts and realized that there was like an instruction that was put on kind of a flow chart that the research staff was following. There was again, just instruction to print out these randomization assignments that listed the patient's drug assignment. So in this direction sheet, the research staff was told to put that sheet in the chart. They didn't realize that when we brought it to their attention in September, they immediately asked us to contact our clinical trial sites and the clinical trial site operation managers and have the staff remove those documents from the chart and shred them. So that was a directive that was given to us by the chief operating officer at Ventavia, who's now a managing member. But that's what we were instructed to do, is to remove the evidence and destroy it. And right after that, that directive was given, there was a text message that was sent to the directors at Ventavia, and it was so that there was a direct and consistent message to Pfizer, because what we'd done at that point was halted any new enrollment in the study. I recommended as their regional director to pause the trial, to stop enrolling new participants until we were able to get a handle on not just the unblinding piece that we'd found, but many others, which we'll get into. So they did agree to pause enrollment, but they still, were doing, I don't even know what the word is that I'm looking for, but, to destroy source documents that were part of a patient's history, I just didn't feel comfortable with. And then the text message that came afterward was even more bothersome. And that was our message about the enrollment pause to Pfizer, was that we just basically met our bandwidth. We were at a point where we needed to pause enrollment because we needed to catch up. We had patients that were enrolled that received their first vaccine that were coming up for their vaccine number 2. And we were just, as a company, we're reached our max in terms of enrolling new patients for the moment. So that was the message that they wanted everybody to relate to Pfizer if we were contacted about why we were pausing enrollment. So we were told to lie and destroy evidence.
Right. Okay. That's important. So told Pfizer a lie and destroyed evidence. And at that point, September 14, I know that your 2 sites that you were working on, there in the end, there ended up being 1,000 trial participants that went through those 2 sites. Would you have an idea
actually,
how many?
Sorry, I apologize to interrupt
That's
you.
right.
There were 3 total clinical trial sites. I was regional director over 2. We had another regional director that was overseeing the site in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
In total, the number of patients that were included in Pfizer's overall efficacy of this vaccine that were from Ventavia is approximately 1,000 between all 3 sites.
Oh, okay. Okay. So how many do you think might have already started with Ventavia by September 14 when you did the pause? You were doing well into it, or?
I would say this is just a guess. I didn't make it at Ventavia very long. I was there in total 18 days, but I would say the majority of patients were already enrolled.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because I know they had to have their 2 shots by a certain point, and then the data had to be collected by November. So, what else did you see?
Lack of informed consent was really the first thing that I saw that they were doing that I know was violating and really putting these patients, their safety and welfare. When I think back to that first day, I really wanted to just get a feel for the way that the clinic was run and the way that it was managed. So I started just shadowing one of my she was actually the lead clinical research coordinator on this study. So I, with the patient's permission, asked if I could just be in the room while she was giving the informed consent. And it was not an informed consent in my mind, and what I would train my research coordinators to provide. Without the informed consent, these people, it's just like in outside medicine. If you don't have a informed consent, you're not able to fully understand the risks, potentially the benefits. This was not a difficult study, but the patients were being given a device to record and track their symptoms. So that had to be explained. Again, this novel technology needed to be described to the patient. So where an informed consent would take me, and once you get kind of your kind of explanation down of the informed consent, it can go faster. But in the beginning, this is something that it would have taken me an hour plus to just go over this informed consent form. And if the patient had any questions, that those have to be explained and documented. I have to document what my response was to the patient and where I got that information from. So what I witnessed this research coordinator do was really go over the information really quickly. And she already had tabbed the location for the signatures and the date of the patient. So it was just quick, here, sign date, flip through a few more pages. This is, information about how your private protected health information is, going to be used within the study. Here, sign here, date here, let's get you vaccinated. I found in a lot of the auditing that I was doing that the actual vaccination was happening prior to the time that the informed consent was obtained. So yes, just things that, you hear about in clinical research, but I'd never seen anything like it. I try to compare it to quick enrolling studies and, large enrolling trials that I've been a part of in the past. And it was nothing I'd ever seen in my entire career.
Wow. So you worked out that some were signed after the trial participant was vaccinated. And I mean, were there even some that weren't signed at all? Or some you suspect were signed by Ventavia staff instead of the participant?
Yes, I did find that in my audit as well. And as part of a patient enrolling into a study, there's, information that we collect from the person, such as, their medical history, their surgical history. As part of this demographic, we collect a copy of the government issued ID or the driver's license. And in my audit of the informed consent forms, in some cases, I was finding where the patient's signature was missing, the date was missing. Sometimes the person that was obtaining the informed consent form signature and date were missing. And other times I was finding where a signature from one page to the next was not matching at all. Or if I would compare those signatures to that was on the ID, that didn't match. So that was a huge red flag. And for me, I was documenting all of this. And on those informed consent forms where there was just missing patient signature, maybe they had signed the incorrect version of the informed consent form. I was flagging that. And the next time that I would go to look at the chart or follow up on something, I would find that flag I'd put on the chart to note the missing signature, that flag would be gone, and there would be a signature that had just appeared. And I knew that, based on the schedule, and I was in clinic, I knew that this patient had not returned to complete that signature. So that was something that Ventavia staff was doing. Even before I went and started at Ventavia, I was getting emails to the email that was created for me there, just so I could kind of get, started a little early and onboarding, yes, and reading over protocols. And again, these old emails that I was looking at, I found one specifically that was talking about 3 different Ventavia employees that had disciplinary action within HR for fabricating and falsifying data. So this was happening even before I arrived to the site. They were aware of it. They knew. And so, just as the days kind of went by, I was in clinic 12, 14 hours. I was staying sometimes late and be there just on my own. And one time I remember, it was actually, I think on the 16th of September, I walked through the clinic and I found, used needles just laying around. The vaccine, which was supposed to be, it was temperature controlled, was just left out on the counter. So I'm just, and a lot of this, Elizabeth, it's sloppy. And I documented this really just to tell a story of, if they're leaving used needles just out and not following standards and guidelines, if they're this sloppy with needles, like what's going on with the other things? And
yeah, so I was going to pass the comment there, because what I'm concerned about, what I'm hearing is the culture. So for me, always in a workplace, what matters is culture. And if the culture is rush it through, right, and be sloppy, that's a very bad sign. I want to talk about the rushing. The question comes up, why are we cutting corners? Why are we rushing? Why are we not spending that hour with each patient going through the informed consent, given that for their safety, they need to know, for legal reasons, I'm looking at one, but I think they need to know, but also they need to know the procedure for reporting adverse effects. That's really important as well. Absolutely. And reporting whether or not they get COVID, right?
Right.
So these things are really important. So if these are rushed through, then my feeling is, well, hang on a minute, maybe these patients don't know how to report their adverse effects, what adverse effects to look for, and how to report the symptoms of COVID. So those things could have been missed.
That's a great point. And actually, in some of the history, when I was looking through patients' charts, was finding that there wasn't an understanding from the patient on how to use their diary. Right. So that certainly, was something that I found.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the agenda. Why the rush? What's going on? How is Ventavia rewarded by Pfizer financially? How does this work? Can you think why they're rushing?
Sure. In my experience, and I've negotiated tons of, clinical trial agreements and budgets. So I never saw the financials at Ventavia. Ventavia's chief operating officer, and the one that's now a managing member, her mother was in charge of all the financials. So we were never able to see a clinical trial agreement. We were never able to look at a budget. And, these things are important in my job, to make sure that, we're billing appropriately, that, overhead is calculated appropriately. So I found now looking back that was strange that we were not able to at least look at that and give feedback. But I would say that based on the trial design and in my experience, that Ventavia was probably, making about $7,000 to $10,000 per patient in this clinical trial. That would be my guess. Based again on my experience and the trial design, the number of study visits, the overhead, the form of payments that we were giving, and that system that we would have to use. So I would guess $7,000 to $10,000 per patient that they enrolled. So that certainly is an incentive for a small company.
Do you think they were rewarded by patient, or
I know they were.
That's the point I wanted to make. Okay, so they're rewarded per patient, right?
Yes.
So my feeling about this would be the priority should have been safety and efficacy, and the reward should be on a tight ship, doing your job well, not how many patients come through, right?
Okay.
So
that's how it's been. That's the way that it should be. They were interested in lining their pockets, and I know that they made millions of dollars on this clinical trial and were rewarded with money and additional contracts that they were awarded by Pfizer, and other indications.
Yeah. I was actually going to bring that up later, but I'll do it now. Ventavia, after this adult trial, got 4 more contracts: the children, the young adults, the pregnant women, and the booster.
Yes.
So they're rewarded.
And not only in this vaccine candidate, but they participated in other COVID-19 vaccine candidate trials as well. They have vaccines are their, what we say here, bread and butter. That's how, and there's just some strange relationships with these pharmaceutical companies as sponsors and Ventavia, which I haven't been able to figure out yet. And that's, something I'm looking into, but I've never seen anything like this beyond the informed consent, the fabrication and falsification of data, the unblinding. We've kind of talked about the adverse events and serious adverse events. Those were not being captured. Those were not being reported appropriately. I can tell you one instance where a patient had a severe adverse event that was not reported or followed up on in 11 days, where it is required by the protocol and the institutional review board that we report these in 24 hours. So it'd been 11 days.
Wow. Do you think that there might have been some adverse events not reported at all?
Yes. There was not a clear understanding of the protocol at Ventavia, and they were not recording adverse events. And I actually have documentation of that later on, after I'd left, that showed that a conversation between Pfizer and Ventavia, where they're having to go back and record certain symptoms patients were experiencing as adverse events because they weren't done so initially.
Wow. Okay. That's really
another one of my huge findings was the temperature storage of the vaccine. It was required, the protocol for those to be stored at a certain temperature and within a range. There was a plus or a minus of the preferred range, which was -70.
Yeah.
At 2 of the clinical trial sites, the vaccine was not being stored appropriately. The temperature is monitored constantly. There's alarms that need to be able to go off if the temperature of the freezer goes outside of a certain range. That was turned off. So
the alarm was turned off.
Yes. There was a cleaning crew that had come in and unplugged the refrigerator, and the alarm did not go off, or the freezer rather. So I don't know, because this is something I found on the 24th, I believe, of September. So I don't know what the resolution of that situation was, but I have no idea that the vaccine was stable from the time that they were receiving the product to when, to now. I don't know if they ever took care of that, but that was certainly one of my findings.
If you found, I'll just go through a scenario with you. If you found some vaccine out of its refrigeration, which I think one of the things you did say you saw, it had been left out. Did you alert anyone? Do you know what the protocol was? I mean, because for me, the protocol would be, we'll throw it out. You can't use that vaccine.
The protocol should have been to immediately quarantine whichever product was affected and immediately alert Pfizer. Right. No additional patients should have been enrolled into the study where that product was used. That was out of range, or potentially out of range.
Did that happen?
Quarantine it? No.
Okay, so here's my problem.
Not that I know of. So I discovered that on the 16th. That vaccine, I know that was left out. It was just a couple of vials. Yeah. So I know that was taken care of because I took care of it. Right. What happened from the 24th forward, I don't know. But it was out of range based on the system that was used to capture the temperatures at certain points during every single day, even if we were on site or not. When I looked at the system, it was out of range for that entire time.
So the problem is, from the science side of things, if that product gets warm, that mRNA is denatured, it's not going to make the spike protein. So when a patient is injected with that, a trialist is injected with that person's not going to make spike protein. That's an invalid test. We're not testing the efficacy or the safety of the product if it's denatured. So that invalidates.
For me, there's a protocol, and that's Pfizer's protocol that I have to follow. Yeah, it is a guide. Yes, and there is a reason,
and that's the reason.
Right? Maybe I don't want to speak about that, but there is a reason that the vaccine has to be stored at a certain temperature. When it goes outside of that range, you take it away and never use it again.
Yeah,
that's what should have happened, and it did not.
And I know the reason for that. It's because I'm very confident the mRNAs, because I've had this conversation with other doctors. It becomes denatured. It can't make the spike protein. If it can't make the spike protein, we're not testing the product anymore. We're testing something else, probably a bunch of nonsense, right? So we're not testing for adverse effects. We're not testing for efficacy anymore, because that's not what we're injecting. We're not injecting spike protein anymore. So it's very important what you've raised, and it's very concerning. So the bottom line is, what you're telling me is you've never seen anything like this before in 20 years.
Yes, that's what I'm telling you. I've never, and I've been involved in very, very high enrolling, quick, fast enrolling studies that, I've just never seen anything like it, and so when I'm finding what I'm finding and I'm taking it to my company, I'm from a military family. So, chain of command is very important to me. So I take it to Ventavia. When Ventavia does not act as they should, I took that directly to Pfizer, although I did that anonymously. And when I felt like no action was being, taken there, and they were aware of what was going on, there were glaring red flags that they were aware of. There's communications that I have with Pfizer directly, with Ventavia as well. They knew what was going on, and they just kept pushing. And I think for Ventavia, it was money. For Pfizer, it was first to market. When you look at the emergency use authorization for Pfizer, which was given on the 11th of December of 2020, and you look at Moderna's, which was given exactly 7 days later, there was a race to be first, and they were hell bent and determined to be that, and nothing would get in their way. No patient safety, no data integrity. It didn't matter. So when I realized that they were, I guess complicit maybe is the word, Warner, I'm not sure, but I took it to the regulatory authority that I believed and trusted that was there to protect the patient safety and, look at the big picture. And I did that on the morning of September 25th of 2020, and Ventavia fired me about 6 hours later.
So that's very telling, Brooke.
Mm-hmm.
So you reported it to the FDA on September 25. Before that, you'd already given heaps of feedback to your superiors at Ventavia anyway for those 18 days. So listen, Ventavia, what did Ventavia say to you when they fired you? Why did they give us their reason for firing you?
The reason was that I was not a good fit.
Oh, okay.
Which is true. I wasn't.
They didn't say to you anything about the fact that you had called the FDA that morning?
No, just not a good fit is what I was in the introductory period that I was not a good fit.
Okay. Did you want to say something, Warner?
I don't want to interrupt this great conversation, but I do want to emphasize, this is really remarkable that the federal government apparently has, reached out to Pfizer and revealed, unblinded the whistleblower who had come forward. I mean, we actually do have a process to blind and protect whistleblowers in this country for a reason. It's so that this stuff can come forward and the information can be shared with the federal government and information can be collected. And in my entire career, this is the second time I've seen that happen. And unfortunately, both of those were fairly recent. So, going back, when I first started in the 90s, I felt like the federal government was very protective of the whistleblowers and worked to preserve their anonymity. And now recently, I see the federal government reaching out in 2 instances recently and unblinding the whistleblower, which causes them to be fired and causes them to, lose the capacity to continue to investigate. So I am literally stunned at that, what I consider to be malicious behavior.
Yep, I actually missed that. That's so important. I completely missed that point. So what you're telling me is Brooke has rung the FDA at 9 a.m. in the morning and maybe sent them an email as well, Brooke, on the morning of the 25th. But you did not copy the Ventavia. That was private.
No, yes.
So that was private. You didn't tell Ventavia, but somehow Ventavia knew 6 hours later and brought you in and fired you.
Right.
So the FDA called Ventavia.
That's the only reasonable conclusion that I can draw from that. There was praise from Ventavia that I was bringing this experience to the company. I was getting along well with the other my other colleagues and the other directors and Ventavia, the management. I knew that I knew what they were doing. I had certain feelings about it, but in just my conversations with the other directors, I felt like, we could, especially in this trial, I just knew that the data was so important, the integrity of it, maybe that, they just don't use this particular data. And, not that we could start over. There were so many things that were wrong, but I guess I was so focused on this one trial and making sure that at least that the data that they'd collected so far wasn't going to be used in the overall, safety and evaluation of how it works in the overall study. So I don't know. I did not think that in making an anonymous call to Pfizer and talking to them about what I'd seen or the call to the FDA that I was going to lose my job over this. That's kind of, it's tough for me to think that, I was doing the right thing. And in turn, I got fired for it.
Yeah. Well, Well, my opinion is, and I'm sure everyone who's listening, you did your job. That was the whole point, right? You were auditing. That was your job. So did that person in Ventavia confirm that they got a call from the FDA?
No.
No.
I was actually, this was actually a day that I chose to work from home as kind of my admin day, catch up on emails, things like that. And after being in clinic already, probably, 50, 60 hours that, 4 days before, I was at home. I made the call, and my son was sick at the time. I was at the doctor's office while he was being examined. I was on the phone with FDA and was directed to their website. I filled out the form online and pressed the send button. And about 3:00 that afternoon, I was getting a call that from the same chief operating officer, actually not even my direct boss, who signed my termination letter, was the one who called me to let me know that they were firing me.
Okay. And that's what you mean, Warner, about being unblinded. So clearly the FDA have called Ventavia and told them that they have a whistleblower.
We really want to get that communication and those records from the FDA on that day to find out who in the FDA, informed. I think they probably informed Pfizer. I think Pfizer has the connection to the FDA that's strong enough for that kind of relationship to arise. I doubt, but maybe Ventavia has that kind of pull. But I think the phone call went from somebody at the FDA to Pfizer, and then from Pfizer to Brook.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So on September 29, the FDA called you, Brook.
Mm-hmm. They did, yes.
And you had a long conversation. And what did you think would happen after that conversation?
I was certain that the FDA was going to send an inspector to the locations and do, an audit of the data at all 3 locations, because this was happening, at all 3 locations. And, with I thought FDA experience, they were probably going to find more than even I did.
Yeah.
More violations of, the codes that govern clinical trials. So I thought that they were going to go in and at least inspect. I felt like, credible in my complaint to them. The conversation that I had with the inspector was, I felt good. Okay. She was very attentive to what I was saying, and my conversation with her pretty much mirrored that which was in my complaint. Maybe went into a little bit more detail and on some things that were just not on my mind at the time that I'd found. And she was sympathetic to the fact that I'd been fired. So I was certain that they were going to go in and at least inspect based on my credibility.
So tell everybody, was Ventavia inspected?
No, they were not.
No inspection from the FDA.
No.
Okay. I think that's really important for everyone to know, because that's our, the American Regulatory Authority. And from my point of view, I'm not in America, but the decisions that are made in America affect the rest of the world. So as soon as the EUA goes through for America, it's just what do we call it? It's just a formality.
I know that. Right.
That other countries like Australia, for example, will just accept the product. So it affects all of us. We've already talked about the fact that Pfizer, not only did they not do the inspections, FDA didn't do the inspections, but even Pfizer. Should Pfizer do an inspection?
They did do an inspection at some point. I don't have the exact dates. But I think they went in and inspected the sites, but I don't know what came from that audit.
Yeah.
I just know that it happened. I can get you that information, and maybe we can link it somewhere else, or I can give you a little write up. But but they did go in and did not find the things that I did.
Yeah. Well, what we really needed was a independent regulatory authority to do that inspection. That's what we want, right?
Yes.
Anyone at Ventavia fired or disciplined for this sloppy workmanship that you know of, other than you being fired?
Yes. Yeah. So But right after I was fired, I reached out to somebody that I'd found through LinkedIn, who was a former employee. I contacted her, and she had a very similar story to mine. She was fired in August of 2020. In June of 2021, I was contacted by my direct boss at Ventavia, the director of operations, who was also terminated for bringing forward the same things that I was talking about. She apologized for not standing up for me.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Well, that's extraordinary. I didn't know about that. So I've actually read some interesting statements that Ventavia have made about you. So
and
one of the focuses, I'm just going to find them now because I don't want to misrepresent what they said. But basically, there's a lot of emphasis about the fact that you only worked there. They say only worked there for 18 days. Here we go.
I can tell you, I can quote what they say, that, I was was employed at Ventavia for 18 days, but none of my job responsibilities had anything to do with the clinical trial in question, which I proved false by providing them, my just a lot of my emails that were directly with Pfizer requesting certain accesses to certain systems that we were using. I was introduced by the CEO of the company to Pfizer directly, stating that I was going to be overseeing the conduct of the study at 2 of the 3 sites. So it was a flat out, bold-faced lie.
Oh, well, that, you know what? I haven't seen that statement. The ones the ones I saw was Miss Jackson worked for us for only 18 days. As a result, did not complete the requisite training for the role for which she was hired. We are confident in our practices and procedures, and should her case move forward, we'll respond to the litigation accordingly. So that's referring to the lawsuit that you later filed.
Well, that was in response to a cease and desist letter that the other attorney, Robert Barnes, sent in response to the original statement, which was that I was employed with them, but only for 18 days, but that none of my job responsibilities had anything to do with the trial in question. They blasted that out to media. And as a matter of fact, it still has not been retracted from MedPage Today, who continues to quote that one article.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I know that you have plenty of proof that you were working on the trial anyway, and that we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things I wanted to comment on, just the 18 days I find offensive. I know to some people that might sound like not a very long time to work somewhere, but a couple of comments I wanted to make. You already pointed it out. You worked long hours and you worked hard. So your 18 days might be like someone else's 36 days. But the other thing is, and I've got a little bit of testing experience myself, it doesn't take long to work out the culture's broken and to find the mistakes.
Yes. And it would not have, I have a trained eye. I'm trained to look for, this type of data, I guess, queries and integrity in that data. This is what I'm trained to do. I have a trained eye for it. But it would not have taken a trained eye to go into Ventavia and recognize the disaster. So that's kind of, 18 days was long enough. It took me one day, actually. But one day to realize.
You could have one day, one interview, watch one research coordinator interview one trialist and see them not go through that informed consent, and you're on your way. Something's wrong. So so the 18 days is nonsense. But that's interesting to hear what they said. So now, something I want to talk about that's very interesting, that everyone was talking about the effectivity of this vaccine, this Pfizer vaccine. The 95% was blasted from one side of the country, the world, to the other when the product was approved. The 95% in the phase 3 trial document was made up of just 170 endpoints. So even though there were 44,000 trialists on the Pfizer trial, half of whom took the real stuff, half of whom took the placebo, they only waited till they got 170 endpoints before declaring the efficacy. And those the endpoint is just, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know this too, a positive PCR test and one symptom. So even though the big number is 44,000, that's all we ever hear, In actual fact, Pfizer only waited till 170 people got a positive PCR and one symptom. And they claimed 162 were from the placebo group and 8 were from the vaccine group. And that's how they got their 95.
Right.
Well, here's the thing, right? And yeah, it seems impressive, although personally I think the numbers are way too low. What if the 170 people came from the 3 Ventavia sites? If you had 1,000 trialists there, we're not told which of the 100, I think there's 153 Pfizer trial sites, if I'm not wrong, altogether.
There are 131 U.S. sites, but 153 total trial sites that were enrolling patients into the trial. From Ventavia, there was approximately 1,000. So, if you look at the way that efficacy was determined on that small number, 168 in the vaccine group and only 162, in the vaccine group and only 8 in
the other way
I said
around.
that wrong.
Yeah,
the other way around. 162 in the placebo group and 8 in the vaccine group. It wouldn't take very many to change that efficacy to below what was required to receive emergency authorization in the first place. And so when I've been approached by medical professionals, medical doctors, I am not one, and I understand that. So when they try to discredit, oh well, it was just 1,000 patients. Those 1,000 patients matter in this trial, and I just, it's frustrating when I hear medical professionals say just 1,000. Well, those 1,000 certainly do matter.
They do matter. Yeah.
And when we try to, and just the data that's been released so far and trying to reproduce that efficacy, we haven't been able to do it yet.
So I want to now move on to you filing a lawsuit, 8th of January 2021. So you were fired, just to put the timeline in perspective, you were fired September 25, and then just under 3 months later, you filed a lawsuit, a False Claims Act. Can you explain, and Warner can pop in when he's ready as well, but I think initially this was filed without Warner. This was with another lawyer. You filed a lawsuit. Explain who the defendants and the plaintiff are and what's the purpose of the lawsuit.
So when I filed, the complaints with the FDA and lost my job for doing that, I still felt very strongly that they were going to go into Ventavia and inspect that site. Over the months, from September through, December, I waited for that to happen. And I know that it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. There was no regulatory, inspection. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I filed the False Claims Act lawsuit. And again, that was on January 8th of 2021. That type of lawsuit immediately goes under seal for an initial 60 days. And that seal is so that the defendants, who in this case are Ventavia Research Group, my former company, Icon, which is a contractor of Pfizer's, and then Pfizer directly. So that is so, the seal is to prevent those defendants from being tipped off to an investigation by the U.S. government.
Okay. And the plaintiff is you?
I am the relator.
The relator.
And yes, and maybe Warner can hop in here and I can take a drink of water.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, explain that side of it for us, Warner, please.
Well, every citizen in the United States and even non-citizens have a right to be a relator. And essentially in the United States, we, in our structure of government, the people are sovereign. So as sovereign people, we can sue on behalf of our other citizens and on behalf of the United States itself. So Brook is stepping into the shoes of the United States. She represents the United States in this lawsuit. That's why it's captioned United States ex-rel Brook Jackson. And, it's a wonderful law. It derives from British law. It derives from the time of the privateers, Francis Drake, in fact, where the privateers would get what's called a letter of marque from the Queen. In that case, I think it was Queen Elizabeth. And then they could go and capture Spanish galleons, and they would get half the gold or half the bounty. So Lincoln in the Civil War era was getting terrible goods. He was getting shoes that were made with cardboard, mules that were lame, gunpowder that was wet, guns that wouldn't function. So Lincoln looked back in the history of law, and we have we're descended legally from the British. And he saw this qui tam, they call it qui tam statute, where you stand in the shoes of the king in that case. But in the United States, you stand in the shoes of the sovereign, which are the people of the United States. So he wrote it himself. He wrote the law. It wasn't terribly long at that time. And people who were ripping off the Union Army could then be held to account by any citizen who knew about it. And then the citizen has a right to keep a portion of that for bringing that information forward and investigating the fraud. So that's kind of the brief history of it. And for years, it wasn't a very effective statute, but starting in 1986, some people may remember this. There was a lot of, the $1,000 hammer and things like that the military was buying. They were overpaying for a lot of goods. And Reagan and some Democrats and some Republicans, one who's still there, Chuck Grassley, teamed up and got this qui tam statute kind of revived and updated for the modern era. And since then, it's been very effective. It's recovered, I think, over $30 billion for the US taxpayer, maybe more since the beginning.
Can you spell qui tam?
Yeah, it's just Quitam. It's a Latin phrase that I say that as a shorthand. It's qui tam pro domino, he who stands in the shoes of the king.
Wow,
but
I
changed that for, those of us who stand in the shoes of the United States, which are the citizens.
Wow, that's so important. So what's actually happening here is that on our behalf, Brook is going, let's just say, suing Pfizer and the two other companies because we are all affected. Because we're all, well, it gets so much worse because we're all being forced or mandated to take this vaccine, but also the American tax dollars is paying for this vaccine, paying Pfizer.
Right. So every citizen has this right. Every citizen has the right to bring a type of lawsuit like that if they see fraud on the American taxpayer. It's essentially targeted at federal fraud. Some states, such as California, Virginia, I think Florida even, there's 22 or 23 states right now that have a state level one. So if there's fraud on the United States, one of the states, a citizen of those states can bring it under that state statute. Illinois is another one I know have. Ohio, where I practice, happens to not have it. I am talking to the state legislature, though, so that we can protect our state and local governments from fraud.
Okay. So it's under court seal for 60 days.
Maybe
then it got extended, right? What happened?
Let me explain that a little bit. Just having done this a long time, the law says that it stays under seal for 60 days. The reality is I have rarely seen them ever unseal a complaint in 60 days. Most of the time, you can't even get investigators assigned for months. They have a relator interview. That usually comes after the 60 days. So, excuse me, on average, I would say that the cases stay under seal 2 to 3 years. Before there's either resolution or it is in the positioning that we're in right now with Brook, where the taxpayer is proceeding on their own to try to recover the fraud. And that's another unique aspect of it. You don't have to have the government involved. We are allowed as citizens to go after that fraud, even if the government does what it did here and fails to continue their investigation. So, I mean, and that's a unique aspect. It kind of helps us, though the government, I mean, there's a lot of complications to this. I don't want to get into all the detail, but anyway, Brooke has a right to proceed. So we're happy to be representing her and proceeding.
Can I just cut in there? If you got that, how is that process? The government has decided not to join Brooke. Have you got something in writing? How did that happen? How is that? Like they've communicated to you. We're not, Brooke, you're on your own.
They communicate officially with what's called a notice of declination.
Okay.
And it does lay out in the notice of declination that the lawyer and Brooke, have a responsibility to keep the United States informed as to the progress of the case. And it is possible, actually, that the United States may, if we're in discovery, may want to see the information that we're getting. And in fact, the United States could potentially come back into the case and assist at some point in the future. But so far, they haven't done that.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to some of the stuff that you found because it seems pretty unlikely. So you wanted to break that court seal. So, you must be frustrated here, Brooke. It's September 2021. You filed in January, and you're not allowed to speak out about what you found. Is that sort of a condition?
That's what I was being told. That's what I was being told. I just had such this part of me that just trusted so much, and I'm really trying not to lose that part of me that I feel like I love about myself, and I just trust. And if I don't know, it's just it's been a long 2+ years for me.
Yeah,
but I thought that initial 60 days something was going to happen, just like I thought something was going to happen with the FDA going in. I thought this was so important. They're looking at, a vaccine for that potentially would go to everybody. So why not look at the site that I'm telling you is committing fraud? And when they went past that 60 days and then requested another 6 months, I was reluctant, but really, the judge could have granted it anyway, even if I said no. I was being told by my former attorneys at the time, that if I went forward with the facts about the case, that the government would come after me.
Oh, yeah, well, no.
It is very important to kind of vet your counsel in this area. It's extreme, and it's very hard to do because the whistleblower probably has never had involvement with a legal situation. And I got to say, this is probably, one of the most complicated possible legal situations imaginable in so many ways, because you have three parties. You have the administration and their agencies. You've got the defendant, or we call him a respondent, and you have the relator. And those relationships, the relationship, you would think the government's going to be on your side. Well, I never go in thinking the government's on your side. And of course, we as, naive in some ways, having not dealt with the government as new relators, they just don't know it. And then the other thing that happens, attorneys deal with this differently. So when a whistleblower comes to me, I do tell them the limits of what they can talk about. The only limit is they can't reveal the existence of the lawsuit. But Brooke, really in her situation, it was so important. My advice would have been very different because she wanted to save lives. She feels that, we're basically in an emergency. We've got people who are dying after taking these shots and getting very ill with myocarditis and cancers and other things. And she felt like she wanted to save lives. So my advice to her in that kind of situation where you have an emergency is, look, you can talk about the facts all you want. You just can't reveal that there's a lawsuit. So with those bounds, then she is allowed to talk. So I think that, each of us as lawyers, we have to make our own, I guess, advice to clients, but we need.
Right, but that was my direct question, because when I wanted to get this information out. I have respect for our legal system. I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize the case or get in trouble. But I also knew that the information I had was so important, and people deserve to know how these clinical trials were run. So that was a direct question, was why can't I just speak about the facts about this case without revealing that there is a lawsuit? I can do that. And that was their response to me. They'll come after you, is what I was told. And eventually in September, when the government requested an additional 6-month extension, I, at that point, was just so frustrated. I had my relator interview, which Warner talked about earlier. That was a, interview with, department heads. How would you describe that, Warner? With the Department of Justice directly?
Yeah, DOJ. Right.
Mm-hmm. DOJ. There were other participants in this meeting, HHS, OIG, Pfizer, FDA's main attorney. There were a bunch of very, at this point, intimidating people to me on this phone call, but it lasted for hours and hours. And, I thought, okay, it's April, but now they're going to do something. Here's just more people that I trust that should be going in, and they failed us again, and just kept kicking the can down the road and requesting extension after extension.
One of the things, that's interesting in what Brook just said is her lawyer's advice to her that they, meaning the federal government, will come after you if you go public. Think about those words and what that means for the positioning of our government. And, for lawyers who are experienced lawyers, she had very experienced lawyers initially on this. For them to say that to a client, and I'm not going to say that's not real, but we as lawyers have a responsibility to push back against that type of behavior, because Brook is free to talk, and to get, to say that the lawsuit itself will not get federal support or proper investigation, just because she wants to go and save lives, that needs very strong pushback. And, that shows that the relationship that whistleblowers have, even with the federal government, is fraught with issues and conflicts. And that's something that needs to change. I can tell you Senator Grassley is very aware of these types of problems and has been working for decades to try to make it better. But I'll tell you what, it has been very tough. I'm going to add one more thing. I'm sorry to go on. But the other thing that we have found over the decades here is that the agencies themselves, the FDA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the military, the Air Force, whatever, there is a certain level of embarrassment or shame or something that causes them not to want these things to be investigated, because they have an oversight responsibility that they have absolutely failed. And bureaucratically, they don't want to be held to account for the failure of oversight, the failure to inspect these investigational sites or this factory or whatever it may be in the particular case. They have this oversight responsibility that they have failed at. So that's a real hurdle. I've seen this bureaucratic mindset in a number of different cases, and I think that they're doing a disservice to the American taxpayer by behaving that way.
Yeah. So just to put, if you want to put a bit of a perspective on that timeline, Brooke. So in September, you were wanting to speak out. So here, and I don't know if you know what's been happening here in Australia, but in New South Wales, for example, we were locked down from June 21 to September 21 with a Delta outbreak, with cases that are nowhere near what we've got now, right? But we were locked down. We couldn't move 5 kilometres from our homes, okay? All along, the government pushing the vaccine. And, in our country it was predominantly Pfizer, a bit of Moderna, but predominantly Pfizer. So push. So the deal was, the deal that was struck, for example, in the state I live in, the biggest state, New South Wales, is people of New South Wales, if you become 95% vaccinated from the ages of 16 and up, we'll set you free. So that's what's going on that's why I can imagine that you're frustrated, because, and you might not even realize what was going on here. We had our Freedom Day in September for only those that were vaccinated because we'd only hit 90%. And then in December, we got our Freedom Day again for everybody because we managed to hit 95%. So while you're fighting to reveal what happened in the trials, the whole of New South Wales is getting vaccinated. Which is Sydney.
No, I was fighting. I can't wait to release all the emails that I was sending to my attorneys. Just, the weight that I felt, the pressure that I felt at the time. And I'll be honest, at the time that I filed, I had no idea what the data was going to look like today, right? I had no idea.
That's right.
But I knew that it was so important that I just needed to come forward, and the emails are just they really tell a story, and I don't like to look at them a lot and go back and read them very often because it's just like it's a desperation. I'm desperate and trying to figure out a way. How can we push this forward? How can these certain acts be enacted, to push this. It's been hard. Yes.
Yeah.
It's been very hard.
I really commend you for pushing through.
Thank you.
Your lawyer quit though, right? And then Robert Barnes took your case, and Warner, you've popped in as one of Brook's lawyers, and you've got a team of, is it 20 attorneys?
We have a number of attorneys around the country that have agreed to help at various levels. So, we kind of have a core group, but we have some other people who are reviewing them. I don't think that we're quite at 20 on that, but a number of people have just given good input to it. Some will have major and minor roles. I mean, right now I would say my firm has a major role. Robert Barnes has a major role.
Right.
Robert is the lead counsel on this. So he has helped to keep the case alive and to drive, is driving this thing home. And he's also, done an excellent job in terms of, media presence and alerting people as to what's going on. But there are a lot of people who want to help, and we are certainly very happy to have insight. As a group, we can be very smart. I think individually, we're not, we're much smarter if we work as a group. So I appreciate input from everyone who's helping out. And I'll tell you really frankly, it's not just lawyers. I mean, let's clarify that. Then it does go to 20 for sure, because we have some very experienced ex-FDA, ex-investigators, ex-pharma employees that are helping us to understand. I mean, I'm no expert on the FDA, and I need their expertise and their knowledge, and then I can distill that into what we need to craft in terms of responses for Pfizer. So, even Brooke knows she throws out some 3-letter words, and I have to ask her, what's that? And I got to look at the index here. So,
for me, I'm not an FDA expert either. My expertise is in the conduct of studies at the very bottom level, at the clinical trial sites where the data integrity is most important, right? And I've had to learn a lot, and it's kind of actually been fun for me to dive into the regulatory review side and learn that piece of it, to learn how it all kind of comes together and how drugs and therapeutics and devices are actually approved.
Right.
And I think too, I mean, it's been fascinating. I've never had a case like this. I mean, we have really worldwide connections. So people who live in Israel, in Europe, people who live in your country, are aware of the lawsuit and have reached out to us. And so, it's just wonderful the way people have coalesced and are sharing, information and knowledge that we couldn't possibly have. So it's in a small way, but it's a worldwide awareness and effort to help bring understanding as to what's going on.
Yeah, well, the whole world's affected now. So the case is unsealed February 2022. So what is the amount that the lawsuit's seeking? Can we talk about that? Or it's on behalf of the
Sure.
US people, by the way, so as you pointed
well,
out.
I probably need to address that. It's actually a little bit complicated
Okay.
because the statute, first of all, the overall cost of the contracts. I mean, so far, I mean, the initial contract was, I think, 1.95 billion. They just signed another $3 or so billion contract. But their overall sales, I think, are about 40 some billion worldwide. So if we take that $3 billion contract, the first part of the statute, well, I guess I'm sorry, we're at 5 billion there, just in the United States, the DoD contract. It's a triple damage statute. So the contract was procured on what Brook has alleged is fraud. If that is proven up, then the damages on just the contract are $15 billion. But here's where this is the bigger aspect of it, though. That's nothing compared to what's coming. There are penalties for every false claim, and as far as I'm concerned, every injection is a false claim. So they have generated, and I think they've actually produced. I think it's 500 million doses. And I know that in the United States, they have probably used in their patients, I'd estimate at least 160, 170 million. So you take that 160 million, see, this is complicated, and you multiply it by what's called a penalty under the statute. The penalty is up to 21,000 per injection. Do that math. 160 million times 21,000. I mean, we're at levels that, which sometimes should happen. We're at levels that would essentially bankrupt Pfizer. And if we think about our civil justice system, it is actually one of the things that this statute should do, and I don't see it doing enough, is it should essentially be the death penalty for this company. And how do you kill a company? You take all of its assets and all of its money, and that should all be returned to the US taxpayer, all the intellectual property, all the actual physical property, all the money that they've gotten, that should all go back to the US taxpayer. And that company could, if things went, ideally, that company could be bankrupted. And then Brook can address, she gets a portion of that. There's some analysis about how much she could get, but she gets presumably 25 to 30% of the recovery as part of her, bounty for discovering and pursuing this fraud. And Brook has some plans, if she were to ever recover anything, what she would do with it.
I can think of who needs the money, and that's the injured. So, but we'll leave it there. So now, obviously, Pfizer, there's no way Pfizer wants this to go ahead. So Pfizer have put forward a motion to dismiss, right? Again, I suppose we'll give this to Warner. So tell us what happened when Pfizer put forward a motion to dismiss. When did that happen?
Well,
that happened this year.
Yeah, that happened this spring. They filed a motion to dismiss. We actually have a response due right now on August 6th. I am going to be requesting some additional time to continue to craft the response to it. And it's not just Pfizer, it's Icon and Ventavia as well. So we have 3 motions to dismiss, actually. But Pfizer's is obviously the lead motion to dismiss. And their basic defense is, under what's called an other transaction authority contract, the only thing they had to accomplish was an EUA. And once they had that, then they were able to contract with the Department of Defense, which I find very disturbing. But they contracted with the Department of Defense initially to provide 100 million doses. And now they've just entered another contract for 350 million doses. So, that's what's going on there.
And I mean, we've discussed this before, Warner, in another video. This when they, as part of their defense filing, they're saying that they only had to produce a prototype and that they don't have to follow the normal regulations with respect to trials?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I got something in my throat there.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I wish people would understand that what's being shot up in your arm is a prototype. There is no requirement under prototype agreement for safety,
Right.
efficacy. We all know the words safe and effective. Well, that's not required here. It's not required to be safe and effective. There's no requirement for good manufacturing practices, good clinical practices, good transportation practices where you've actually monitored the temperature from point A to point B at the chain of custody. So there's so many potential areas of breakdown, I think, and I think in Brooks, has shown us and told us that it has broken down. It's broken down dramatically. And then we go into, even the VAERS system. It's supposed to provide a safety signal for us. Seems to be completely ignored. We have seen Pfizer reach out to nurses that are in putting data into the VAERS system and send them letters. Those letters feel very threatening to those nurses. And by the way, those nurses have been fired. So what is Pfizer really doing? I mean, we don't actually know, but it appears that they're reaching down to the hospital level and saying, hey, why do you have so many VAERS filings? And then the nurses or the doctors or whoever's doing it comes under scrutiny and is potentially fired. So, I just want to say thank you to all the brave people, certainly to Brook and all those brave people who are persisting and trying to get the data into the VAERS system, because we know there are tens of thousands at least in terms of deaths. And we've never seen anything like this before. So I hope that was clear. I guess I went on and on, but here's what I would also say. I do want to say one more thing. To me, the essence of any bargain about drugs in this country, and I think everybody can understand this, is that drug better be safe and effective. Exactly what they've said all this time. And the fact that this drug is unsafe and proven ineffective now is really a tragedy. And that's the essence of the bargain that we made with Pfizer, that they would provide a safe and effective shot for the American people. And that's where I think that condition of payment, that it be safe and effective, and that they would not give false data and problematic data to the FDA to get the EUA. I think that's the core of this. Right. And if they succeed in this, I'm really, I'm really going to be I am upset in the fact that they've succeeded so far. But I think they have broken with the American people. They have broken the essence of the bargain that we had with them to provide something that's safe and effective. And it makes us distrust everything that goes from here.
So I'm just one thing I want to clarify. I don't know whether I'm getting confused. That other transaction authority, that contract signed where they only needed to provide a prototype, that was after the EUA was granted.
Yeah, that's correct. The only requirement to enter into the payments from the Department of Defense was that they achieve an EUA. So they got the EUA with all the problems that Brook has explained in her lawsuit.
Right.
And in my view, my view is just that no reasonable regulator, no reasonable bureaucrat, having seriously considered everything that has happened here, would have ever granted any type of approval or license to Pfizer.
Correct.
And,
okay.
and I'm going to tell you, I'm using that word for a very specific reason, because I'm not sure the government, I think what Pfizer's arguing is that, well, these regulators didn't do anything. And I have a criticism in that argument. I'm like, these regulators were not reasonable. And we need to look at what it would take and what a reasonable regulator would be.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have reasonable regulators when Pfizer and the drug companies are pumping so much money into, our federal agencies and helping to fund them. I think that creates a bias and a conflict of interest that has really, really trashed our regulatory system. So that's kind of the philosophy behind our effort in this case, the reasonable regulator. And I'm not sure to be honest, we don't know that the courts will adopt the reasonable regulator standard that I want them to adopt. I mean, if they go with the subjective standard of these current regulators, that's going to be a problem because these current regulators are unreasonable.
Right. So another thing I heard was that the judge has ordered that you are entitled to discovery. Pfizer tried to object. So discovery is you being given all the material that Pfizer has around this contract?
Well, no, listen, no, that's not correct. Right now, we have to survive this motion to dismiss. So if we survive the motion to dismiss, then we will be able to engage in discovery.
Oh, okay. So you have to.
I can tell you, having been in this position, we're going to be arguing about what are called protective orders, confidentiality orders. So it's very important that those who are working with the public documents that were released from the FOIA lawsuit that Aaron Siri did, that effort continue, because that's also discovery. That can also help us and is very important, because what we receive may be problematic in terms of what we can talk about in public.
Okay. So I think that's the legal. Is there anything else you want to tell me about the legal case, Warner, that I haven't brought up?
I'm sorry that you can go on and on. I think we're good. I mean, I don't want to. It's hard for people to understand, but I think you've done a good job of making it clear here, and I think they have enough clarity now about the whistleblower process, about kind of the standards here. I think this has been very helpful. I don't want to overwhelm anybody with it because it is very, very complicated.
Yeah. I'll change my question then now to Brooke. Sort of like a last question I wanted to ask is, how has this experience impacted you? I mean, you sort of touched on it a bit, but how are you doing?
Yeah, I feel like, especially since Warner's joined my legal team, he's just given me just my faith back, the fight back in me. Everything that I've done and continue to do is for the vaccine injured. I'm sorry, I couldn't say earlier because I was getting a little emotional about it, because when you think about the potential recovery, if there is success in this case, and what that can do for their lives, just makes me, a little emotional. These people are injured. They've lost their lives. They've lost the lives of loved ones, and again, some are just they're suffering. And so I just, I want to help them in any way I can with my voice, or, with Pfizer's paycheck. But I'm just continuing to fight for them. I have a great supportive family. I'm a soccer mom. I'm not a political person, so I try to stay out of that. But I'm doing okay. Like I said, I think I have a great attorney team, and I have great support from the people that are helping in this fight. And I hear it quite often that Brooke, you just need to realize that you're going to be on the right side of history here. And I feel very strongly about that. Everybody that's helping us is, and I kind of rest on that.
Yeah. Well, you need to know that, and I didn't bring it up, but you did hand some information over to the British Medical Journal. I think I saw it was published November, and I know Dr. John Campbell did a review on it. But that paper was really important, and you might not realise it, but you'll undoubtedly save lives. People will have seen it; it will cast their doubt on the trial process and the whole words safe and effective, and they might have decided, you know what, I'm not going to have that booster, or I'm not going to have that first shot. I've lost faith in the process, and I'm not going to be part of this. So there's no doubt you've saved lives. There's no question already.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just know I tried to do it sooner. I mean, I thought when I filed that lawsuit, by March, they would shut it down, and it just keeps going. And that's hard for me to understand, but I just keep going. I just keep fighting.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to both of you, and I wish you the best, Warner, for I think you said it was August 6th, or the response anyway to the motion to dismiss, and keep at it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Warner.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dear friends, in our life, truth becomes a very important element. Truth becomes the thing that guides us. And when we speak of truth, we speak of transparency, we speak of honesty, we speak of reality. But the opposite side of truth is illusion. And in our world, we have many instances of illusion. Our entertainment industry is based on illusion. When we look at some of the films that are graphically enhanced, where we have Superman, or rather super transgender person, flying about all over the place, it's all done through illusion. The person doesn't actually fly. But when we look at it, it looks true. It looks real. So illusion is something that can lead us astray. And truth is something that leads us on the right path. Truth is something that we expect of people in whom we place faith. A child would have truth, or expect truth rather, from their parents because they trust in them. We as people expect the truth from those people who lead us in various different ways. In politics, as a nation, as religious groups, people in industry, in all sorts of organizations. Usually if they say something because of who they are, because of their status, we believe that what they say and what they preach is truth. What can take us on a fairly horrific and scary path is when we find out that that truth is not truth, but in fact illusion. When the things that are told to us are not real. When there's no transparency. And the horrific part of this is that once the truth is exposed, that the truth or supposed truth that is being told to us is in fact illusion. The horrific part is the response of the people who are being caught out. Because quite often they're not going to say, well, you're right, we have been telling you lies. They're going to try and make the person who has found out the truth, who has made known the illusion, they're going to make them pay. They're going to try to, in some way, subdue them, make them sound ridiculous. Look at their background and say, well, they're not qualified to make such statements. They're going to discredit them. And in some cases, as we've seen, they will do all in their power to censor them. This is what was happening in the 30s in Germany, when people were calling out the fascists and the Nazis for what they were doing. They were closing down all sorts of media, and the government took hold of the media and produced their own truth, in inverted commas. So when illusions are being caught out, people can panic. But the idea of illusions being in some way portrayed to us as truth is that we need to pursue the truth. In one part of John's Gospel, Jesus continues with the truth of who he is, that he indeed is God. And as he's speaking to the Jewish people, some take him to task, some leave him, some want to stone him. And there's a faithful group who remain with him. And he tells them in John chapter 8, verse 32, that you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. If we pursue in finding out the truth, in establishing the truth, then freedom will be ours, because all will be made known, all will be revealed. There'll be no time, no sense, no need for illusion. Because illusion leads us down the path of nowhere, really. We hear of illusions in our media, in our entertainment industry. When we look at magicians, they base their shows on illusion. So when we pursue illusion, we pursue lies. When we pursue truth, we pursue freedom. So it's good for us to recognize, to discern what is given to us. And in our present society, we need to filter through everything that is told to us, whether it's through government, whether it's through church, whether it's through organizations, to question things, to discern what is being presented to us. Because what could be presented to us is illusion rather than truth. And to remember that knowing the truth will set us free. So let us not fear to challenge these institutions, these organizations, these companies. Let's not fear to take them to task and ask them, what you're presenting to us, is that real? Is it truthful? Or is it an illusion and a lie? People at that particular level of society owe us the truth, and we need to pursue it, especially if we believe that what is being told to us is illusion and not truth. I'd like to conclude with a prayer to Our Lady Help of Christians, who is the patron of Australia. The bishops in Australia, when they were going through a fairly difficult time, decided to take on the title of Mary Help of Christians as the patron of the very small colony, a colony that was being formed at around 1840. And at their first synod, they proclaimed Mary to be the patron of Australia. And I'd like to conclude with this prayer. Lord, you place deep in our hearts the love of Mary Help of Christians. Through her intercession, grant that our leaders and people may live with integrity, with honesty, with truth, and with peace. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.